Hey everyone, Two Brain Cell here. I'm currently a challenger player in NA, and this is going to be the first and hopefully a series of videos that I make on TFT fundamentals. And so today I want to talk to everyone about playing strongest board, which is a term that's often used in the competitive TFT community, but isn't one that's very well defined, right? And everyone's going to have their own definitions of what this means, but especially for players who are just starting out, all the way up until high plat, low diamond. These are some very important concepts for you to learn, as well as keep in the back of your mind while you're playing the game. And even if you are in diamond, even if you are in something like low masters, I think these are ideas that would be good to refresh as well as keep in your head while you're playing, because even if you understand all of the concepts, sometimes it's difficult to execute on them while you're playing. So what does playing strongest board mean to me? Well, the first thing is to maximize the traits that you currently have on your board, right? So to hit your 2 Vanguard mark, to hit your 4 Vanguard mark, to hit your 2 sharpshooters and whatnot, right? Just making sure that you're not running like inefficiencies with something like 1 Vanguard, 3 Vanguard, right? 3 sharpshooters, something along those lines, right? Choosing the stronger early game traits. And this just means that there are some traits in the game which aren't as impactful early on, such as Siphoner. And if you have the choice between something like Siphoner and Divine, right, you should probably opt for the Divine because it's a much stronger early game trait, right? Utilizing items on your bench, which is also known as slamming items, which just means to make items early so that you have power on your board rather than having a bunch of components sitting on your bench. And positioning your units for success, which ties into our last point of the game, scouting. And so in this video, I'm going to go over a lot of early game boards that I think are strong, and then try to run through some of these points with each example board. So let's just get right into it. So this is a very classic early game board that people have been running since set 4, because a lot of these synergies are unchanged, right? And so you have good frontline and backline separation. You have good tankiness in the front line. You have pretty good backline damage. You have this dynamic threat in Jarvan who accesses the backline and provides CC. And you have this really nice luxury synergy Spirit, which buffs up the whole team, right? Now, in comparison to something like this, right, where you're running 4 Vanguards, right, and you might think, wow, this provides me so much more armor, so much more tankiness for my Garen, but it makes your fights a lot more difficult because there's no more backline access from the Jarvan, right, and the fights are just a lot less dynamic without Spirit, without the Jarvan, and you even drop the Warlords, which lowers Garen's damage and lowers Nidalee's damage, right? And so playing a board like this usually gives you more options during the fight and more positioning tricks during the fight, right? Now, in terms of positioning, right, this is pretty standard if you scout the board or scout the lobby and see that there are some assassin players and you want to prevent the assassins from jumping onto your backline immediately and from your backline being unable to get any cast off, right? Now, if you scout the lobby and you realize that, oh, look, there's nobody playing assassins, right? You can actually position Jarvan frontline right next to the Garen, right? And you might think that this lowers Garen's value because Garen wants people to surround him so that he spins and gets max damage on everybody on the team. But as a general rule, Jarvan will get his ult cast off before Garen starts to spin, right? Thereby leaving the enemy front line free to surround Garen and letting Garen get max value off, right? Now, in terms of variations, obviously if you high roll some early 3 stars, you can replace Diana with Kindred, Diana with Yuumi, both of which are significantly better units than Diana, who is really only in the composition as a synergy bot early, right? And moving forward into the game, having something like a Yuumi is very, very nice because it allows you to slot in Janna for level 6 for Mystics. And then the great thing about this comp is you can also, transition into later game units, such as, replacing, let's say, Nidalee with Sivir, right? So even though you lose the Warlord synergy, you get a Sivir, right? And that's sometimes better, right? And those are all things that you can judge, right? But this composition, or the composition that we had at the very beginning, so let's put it back up. This composition gives you a lot of flexibility. It gives you a lot of different ways to position, as well as a lot of dynamic ways to fight, right? Now, another good variation of this composition is also including keeper. Sorry, not this keeper, but let's say a Rakan, right? Including keepers into your build, and you would adjust the positioning like this because it helps to buff up the Garen. You maintain the warlords, and all you're losing is that luxury synergy we were talking about earlier of Spirit. So let's move on to the next board. So this looks a lot like that last position that we were talking about. This is I've chosen Cultist Elise as our example chosen unit, right? And this is a very strong board, similar to the one that we just had on the board over here, right? It requires you to have high roller Sivir early on, but it provides this great keepers front line, along with Garen, who's buffed up by the keepers, right? And of course you can slam a Sunfire onto the Garen, just like we did in the previous on the previous board. Now, if you don't high roll a Sivir, right, what are the other cultist options that you have? Well, one of the better cultist options that you have is this Vladimir over here, right? And so if you're running this this early game board, right, what slots in good with Vladimir? Well, Siphoners is really good for Vladimir, right? And if you're gonna run this Nasus as a level 5, great, you can slot in Divine as well, right? And so this sort of comp building should be something that you always keep in the back of your mind of, okay, if my level 3 is like this, what do I want my level 4 to look like? If my level 4 is like that, then what do I want my level 5 to look like? And it will make your early game a lot smoother because you aren't scrambling to think about what units fit best in your comp, right? Let's look at one final cultist setup with Cultist Elise, where you replace the Vladimir with the TF, right? So with something like a TF, then obviously you want to run mages, right? And so this early setup right here still takes advantage of the keeper shield, right? And it allows you to run mages and some good protection for the Annie, who's already a pretty decent frontline unit in and of itself, right? And so as you can see, with just this one cultist Elise, there are so many strong variations that you can run depending on what early units that you roll, right? So let's move on to the next board. The next board, this is very different from anything that we've looked at so far, and this kind of requires you to have high rolled some early 3 costs, right? So this is the absolute best version of this board if you get a brawler chosen, right? This is a level 5/6 brawler board with Shyvana with Hurricane, right? This is your dream board, right? But let's say you don't high roll a Nunu, right? And let's say you get a Shyvana but you don't high roll a Nunu, that's fine, right? You can run this board right here, right, with the 4 brawlers, right? And then you can slot in Dragon Soul, which is a very strong synergy right now, right? And with this sort of positioning, you generally want to have your Dragon Soul units on opposite corners of the board, right, with your Shyvana frontline so that she gets the first Dragon Soul proc, right? Now, the reason why you want to have your Dragon Soul units on the opposite side of the boards is for 2 reasons. First, if your Shyvana dies, right, and transfers the proc over, right, one of the units will be able to free hit, and if that unit that gets the Dragon Soul proc dies, right, it'll transfer over to the opposite side of the board, thereby giving that unit a little bit more time because it's hitting all of the units as it's walking towards it from one side of the board to the other, right? The second reason why you want to position them on opposite corners is in the case of assassins where your Shyvana doesn't get the first proc, you don't want both your Dragon Soul units to die right off the bat, as well as you want the proc to go to Shyvana. So if the assassin jumps on the Tristana, for example, right, and your Brand is over here, right, then when the Tristana dies, then the proc goes to Brand instead of going to Shyvana if you were positioned on opposite corners of the board, right? And so with this sort of early game board setup, there's not a lot of variations to the board because you're mainly just trying to run brawlers and Dragon Soul, but it's a very, very strong board, and I would recommend if you have the components to slam a Hurricane on the Shyvana early if you have this sort of situation. Okay, moving on. One of the most common early game chosens that you see taken is Fiora, right? Either the Enlightened or the Duelist variation. So this first board is the is the enlightened variation, right? Obviously, you have to high roll 2-3 costs, right? Which I'm not saying is very easy to do, right? But this is the ideal example board for something like an enlightened Fiora, right? You get the 4 enlightened trait, you get 2 duelists, you get divine with Jackson and Aurelia, and you get mystics, right? This is such a strong board early, right? But let's say you don't, high roll these units, and let's say you get the duelist trait. Well, let's take the Aurelia and the Yumi off the board, right? A much more realistic board that you often see in this sort of scenario is something like this, right? Where you get 4 duelists, right? But they're all 1 or 2 costs, right? You get the early Janna, right? And then you get an early Nasus for divine, and this really buffs up your front line, right? To allow them to have much more tankiness, to have a little bit of true damage, right? And buys your Fiora time to get to that point where she's perma-stunning the enemy team, right? And in terms of positioning, you usually want to surround your Fiora with 2 other frontline units, because Fiora doesn't want to get hit early in the fight, if at all possible, right? She wants to be able to build up her duelist stack so that she's attacking so fast that she's permanently parrying throughout the fight, right? And so in comparison to the board that we had before, this is a much more realistic board in terms of units that you can hit and units that you can roll. Now, obviously, if you feel like your front line is strong enough, for example, if you somehow get Jax 2 this early, right, and you high roll something like a Yumi, you can always think about replacing the Nasus with a Yumi, right, to get mystics and a little bit more tankiness for the whole team. And finally, let's look at a board that's more mage oriented, because we haven't really looked at one yet. Let's say you get a mage brand chosen or a mage Twisted Fate chosen, right? This is a very nice early game board setup, which includes some decent tankiness with Braum and Garen, right? As well as some added burst damage with Dragon Soul, right? And the nice thing about this board really is that it transitions pretty smoothly if you wanted to, if you roll some other mages, right? And you want to replace Dragon Soul and Vanguard with something like Annie and Lulu, right? And then this way you can run 5 mages, which is a lot more burst damage, right? And just a lot more damage in general in your fights. And in terms of positioning, also you generally want to just dodge assassins by moving to the opposite side of the board as they are, right? So thank you all for watching. I'm going to include a album of all the pictures of these early game boards in the description of this video, and stay tuned for my next videos on TFT fundamentals. Thank you.